GPSR. You've got the questions and I've got the answers. Well, kind of me. I've just finished a session with Lucy Legal, who's a UK lawyer who helps small businesses run their business, well, legally. And not only that, that she also has an EU representative business as well. So she is the perfect person to talk to about GPSR, to get down to the facts. Now, this session, it was very much a conversation, lots of questions back and forth. I'd collated questions in advance, so I'm kind of quietly confident that your question will have an answer. But what you really want to hang on for is right at the very end, Lucy talks to us about how she is currently working with one of her clients. And actually, I think it's a genius way to make sure that you can still sell into the EU while being legal and complying to GPSR, but without having to put everything on hold and do everything all at once. So it's worth waiting for that tip as well as getting all the answers. GPSR is what we're here to talk about. And rather than just have my take on it today, we've got a real expert, someone who really knows what she's talking about. So I'm just going to hand straight over to Lucy. So Lucy Legal, as we know her. That was a short and sweet intro, wasn't it? Sorry, I'm not very good at introductions.
I think it was after the recording glitch that it's thrown everybody off. But hello, and I'm so pleased to be back. I know that I chatted to a few of you before about legal things, and I'm delighted to be chatting to you today about GPSR, which a lot of people think is the same as GDPR, but they're two totally different things. GPSR is a relatively new concept, but not, as many people think, just something that was sprung on us at the end of last year. It has been around for a while, and it's essentially all about safety legislation for products, so the sale of products into the EU and Northern Ireland. And there is now a requirement, if you sell into those territories, that you do certain things and that you have certain paperwork in place. And that, in a nutshell, is GPSR. So you might be thinking, well, what does that mean? What do I have to have in place? What do I have to do? There are requirements now that if you're selling into the EU or Northern Ireland, you have to have what's known as a technical file of safety information about your product. Now, I would imagine, because of the way that most of you run your businesses, you probably already have a lot of this information available already. It's probably information that you have without even knowing about what components go into your product, what materials, all of the different things. You may have a lot of it already. You just possibly haven't put it together in the technical file all in one place. Now, in addition to having the technical file, you also need to ensure that you have got things in place, including protocols for recall, and also you have appointed an authorized representative. Now, it is that step that a lot of people feel is onerous and expensive and unnecessary. And the appointment of an authorized representative means that you need to appoint somebody who has a business based in the European Union, and they can act as your representative, which means that they hold all of your paperwork, they hold your technical file about your products, and you and they then act as essentially the go-between between the authorities, so the ports that where things are being moved in and out. When things move into when your consignment, your products move into the EU, if the authorities want to have any information about what is in those products, what's the safety things, safety information relating to those products, that the authorized representative can provide that information on your behalf. I appreciate that many of you think, well, why can't they just contact me and ask me? I understand that that would be an option, but that is not what the EU now require, and it is up to them. Given that the UK have obviously left the EU, they can decide that if people want to import into their territories, that's what has to happen. And this isn't just a penalty on people who are in the UK, it also applies to you if you're based in Canada or America, or essentially anywhere that isn't in the EU. So that's what you need to be aware of, that's what you need to do. If you are just selling in the UK to UK, then, apart from obviously excluding Northern Ireland, if you're just selling in the UK, then you do not need to do anything. You do not need to change anything. Although I know that Nicola wants to discuss the potential safety changes that are coming and the safety requirements that are no doubt now on the way as well. So it may be that you want to continue to listen to what's potentially going to be something that's going to impact you in the future, so you can get yourself and your business ready. So what do you think, Nicola? Does that cover off the basics and cover off not too scary, I suppose?
I think so. I think if we go through the questions that I've compiled, I think that will start to pull in other elements, because I think overall most people have started to get a feel for what it is now. It's just the fact of the details more than anything, and some of that is down to interpretation, isn't it? Because that's, to me, one of the problems with anything legal is it's all open to interpretation. And not only have we got the interpretation of different platforms, we've got the interpretation of different countries. I remember when it first came out in December, and then reading the Northern Ireland. I've got to stop saying NI and typing NI. Every time I type in NI, it says Nicola. So I end up seeing all sorts of odd emails that talk about GPSR and GPSR. You said it GDPR, and now it's in my head of confusing the two. Okay. It doesn't matter. Let's get on with the questions. I can't remember where I was going. I'm waffling. We haven't got enough time. So if anyone's got any questions, pop them in the chat. I will kind of check in with them and try and put the flow in. Okay, so first of all, digital products, are they covered as well as physical products?
The legislation didn't cover this off directly, but the EU Commission stated in one of their notices before Christmas, so back in December, they said, yes, they are covered. So the GPSR applies to the sale of digital products into the EU as well. Now, I think it's really important to remember, I'm a UK-based lawyer. It's my job to tell you, help you, support you, tell you what the law is. It's not my job to necessarily critique the law and to say whether it's a good piece of legislation or whether it's helpful and how it's going to work in practice. Because the next thing that people always say to me is, okay, I get that there's safety, that there's a physical product going in and that somebody needs to have ownership of that and it's going to be potentially stopped by customs. But how are they going to police the sale of an electronic download or a digital course or something like that? That is not clear. My reading of the guidance that was provided by the EU is that it wasn't that they didn't have businesses, for example, that operate totally online. For example, you may all know that I have got a legal template shop. We operate in the UK and we sell templates in the UK. I don't think they're thinking of businesses that are sort of e-commerce but digital e-commerce when they are when they were thinking of that. I think maybe they were thinking of maybe supporting information that was going with physical products, but nonetheless it stipulates expressly that digital products are caught, and therefore I have to share that information with you and say, yes, if you sell digital products to the EU or Northern Ireland, then the legislation applies.
Okay, so yeah, I agree with you that it was just like, how on earth are they going to monitor? They haven't thought this through, is basically my take on that. But I suppose if something does go wrong and you do get reported, that's when you're going to get picked up at the very, very least.
Yeah, and I think that this is the part where we need to just start thinking about, yes, this is potentially frustrating. If you have previously had an income, a revenue stream selling out into the EU, and this has like stopped that, any impact on your workload and everything, very, very frustrating. I get that. I understand. The fact of the matter is that there has to be a requirement to look after the safety of people. When you're selling a product, there has to be some sort of protection for consumers that they are buying something that's legitimate and that's not going to damage them or make them ill. And that has to be traceability elements. I think we all are in agreement that safety is important. And therefore, you can also see, for example, things about selling digital products online. Me and other people in the online space have been calling out for ages about more compliance, more regulation, more people being who they say they are. So if as part of what you're selling, if you are someone who's selling a digital course on health and well-being, for example, if part of your risk assessment is, I'm a qualified personal trainer and I keep my qualifications up to date, and therefore that's why I'm well placed to deliver a course on this and I actually know what I'm talking about, that's got to be a good thing, hasn't it? That kind of part of the risk assessment of, is this product inherently risky? Some things that people sell online are inherently risky, I think, if we're all honest. So I can kind of see where that bit,
yeah,
there is the good element there to it as well.
Yeah, one of my first videos about it, when I first was going through it all, I put, I think ultimately this is a good thing. Comments underneath like, how is this a good thing? But go, if you take it to the core of the fact it's about consumer safety and consumer protection, then that has to be a good thing. So basically, I'm going to read out a list of things that I've got here, which are sewing patterns, digital art commissions, digital prints, knitting, crochet patterns, colouring books, thinking PDF downloads, embroidery, cross-stitch designs, SVG files for cutting machines, ebooks, online courses, classes, workshops, 3D printing files, NFTs, technically all covered. How that works in practice, we still have yet to find out.
Well, only the element of the how it's getting stopped. The part about you providing the information in the technical file and the safety elements of it, you can still comply very easily. And as I say, I would imagine that you do almost all of the things anyway. So essentially, it's about version control. When are you updating it? How do we people know that that's the latest version of the product? How are you notifying people if there's a problem with it? So if there is an issue with it, how are you updating it? When there is an update that goes out, how are you contacting people? It's the same sort of supply recall protocol or update and changes protocol that you would probably have in place in your business anyway to tell people about there being an update. So you can still comply in the same way. I guess if you only sell digital products and courses, you might then think, well, what's the point in having and paying for an EU representative, because it seems expensive when I'm never going to get caught. That's up to you. That's the same thing about when people say, oh, I'm not buying insurance, because there's no point. Although I suppose it's slightly different because this technically is the law and it's stipulated as a legal requirement.
Okay, so leads on to EU rep, and I think we've just kind of really covered this about whether it's worth it or not. So one of the questions I had is being concerned about the cost and the effort involved. She creates all her own art and nothing is mass produced, and she's concerned about the cost of an EU rep and all the documentation and whether it's worth it. I think we've kind of covered that if you want to sell into the EU, then legally you have to make it worth it. So your decision is not to sell or to sell.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not a case of shall I get an EU representative or not? You have to have one. It is a legal requirement. You don't have to have them do all of the documentation for you. We actually now have another business. It's not Lucy Legal. It's a business set up in Dublin, providing an EU representative service. And it's a flat rate fee, which we know is super competitive for people. And we're sort of acting there as the people who've done all the paperwork and then providing that low rate fee. Vic has said you need a representative in each country, or is one in each one, or is one in general enough, is what you asked. It depends on what the EU representative service offers, but most of them offer one for everything. So you only need one. So as long as your representative covers all countries, then you will be covered. Remember as well that, because the sort of second part of your question is if it has to be all in each country's language. This is a really interesting part where it does have to be. You do have to provide all your technical file and your documentation in the different languages where you are shipping to. And again, it was the UK authorities who have said that they are happy and they have recommended AI translation. I would err on the side of caution as to how accurate they are, but the UK authorities are saying at the moment that is adequate, that you provide a translation in the relevant countries. So if you're selling to Germany, France, you must have it in French and German, and that you provide the technical file in the main language of the country where it is being sold to.
Shelley underneath has commented she contacted OPSS. I don't actually know who that is. I'm sorry, Shelley. Don't know if you do, Lucy, but they said digital files are not covered by this.
I've seen mixed reports too, but the latest official report that I saw was that they are.
If you said it's come from the EU Commission and they specifically said yes, I think the issue is the fact that it isn't clear, as you said in the.
I think that there may be more. Like, it's not for me to advise anybody on this. That's just all of that we're talking about today is just information only.
Yeah.
But if you were selling and you wanted to wait and consider whether there might be more information provided and more detail provided, then you may want to do so. I know that there has been more information that's come through, bits that people keep saying, I wasn't aware of this, or I think there's a few questions that Nicola and I are going to talk about where I was of the view of something anyway, and people have gone off and asked the question to some of the regulators, and they've come back and said, yeah, that's right. As we say, there's an element of interpretation to this. Although the legislation came out sort of 18 months ago, it was only in force in December, so there's a lot more questions and a lot more things happening now. So it's something to bear in mind. But yeah, at the moment, the EU Commission is stating that it's applicable now.
So just to add to that, I mean, I've only really paid attention to the law when it comes to selling online since I kind of have been running this business for what, 12, 13 years. And it's not something, I'm not a lawyer. We all know that, just want to make sure it's clear. But the one thing that I have spotted, that every time something comes out, there's very much, I call it a settling in period, that kind of, as much as there's a start date, at that point, it is still all open to interpretation. You hear all sorts of different things. And then after a few months, it kind of has all settled down. And by that point, you really know. And I feel we're still in the settling in period, if I'm honest.
We are, to some extent.
That's not an official legal thing. That's just my personal.
Yeah, no, and you're right in terms of how it feels and how the information available. And there will be more information about, for example, I think the digital products thing, I think there might be a U-turn on that. I don't know. I'm saying this is where we are on it now, but I also think it's worthwhile remembering, because people are saying, is there a grace period? There's a difference between a grace period and a settling in period. Nicola's sort of saying we're getting more information, you'll get clearer guidance, but there's no grace period. It applies now. If you are selling if you have a product that is shipping, this legislation applies now. So you need to have everything in place now.
I definitely don't mean anything official. I just mean from my personal point of view of knowing how to apply it and how to put it into my business. That's the element that I mean, but we still have to try and be legal as much as we can in everything else in between. I just read a question on there. Print on demand services, who's responsible for the EU rep? It's us, isn't it? We're the ones who are doing the products. It's
selling into the EU.
Yeah. All right, lots of questions, and I'm trying to see if I can
sell to somebody in the UK and they print it somewhere else and they create it somewhere else, then it's obviously where you've sold to them.
Did that make sense, Andrea? One question isn't on my list, and I meant to put it on my list. This is about selling direct to consumers. If you sell to a business that's inside the EU and they are selling on to consumers, my understanding is that you still have to comply with everything, but you don't need the EU rep because you're selling to a business, and so they are effectively the rep themselves because they're the ones that are inside the EU and selling direct the products to their consumers. I haven't probably worded that very well, but I hope you understand the way I mean it.
I understand what you said, the wording. I think just the simple route through is this is a consumer piece of legislation. So it's about selling. It's about when you are selling into the EU. So that's when it applies.
But the company you're selling to inside the EU, they still have a responsibility to make sure that any products they're selling comply with GPSR, which is why you still need to comply and make sure your product.
Well, potentially it depends. Obviously, like if you sell to somebody in the EU and then they're selling in the EU, but they're already based in the EU, then it wouldn't matter. So, like if you're selling to a company based over there, then they move it forward. They're not bound. They're not bound by the requirement. Yeah, I think this is what you're trying to say. They're not bound by the requirement to have an EU representative because they're in the EU.
Yeah, they're in the EU.
But what they will still be required to comply with the safety standards, and they're still
make sure that
part of those safety standards includes things like the traceability and looking at the product as a whole. So can you go through the product supply chain and identify things in the supply chain? So if there's an issue with the product, they're still going to need to come back to you and rely on that information. You'd still need a technical file, but obviously you can hold that, and they'll say there's a problem with this element of it, or the dye is coming off on people, or whatever it might be. They're still going to come back to you, and you're still going to want to rely on sort of the traceability elements and that kind of thing for your own use. But you don't need any, they won't need a representative.
Andrew's put, still confused. If they sell my art to someone in the EU and take care of printing and posting, am I still responsible as they fulfill the orders? I'm going to say yes, because they're acting on your behalf. Is that not?
So I think comes down to the fact that when you're selling to them, are you sort of suggesting that you're selling only digital because they're then going to print it?
So this is print on demand. So, for example, if that was my art on the cup, but it's going straight through a print on demand company.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So essentially, what you'll be trying to say is, I'm only selling a digital file. I'm only selling the digital element because it's print on demand. I'm just telling you what you would need to print. Is that what you're saying? That it's just a digital file that you're selling?
No, they are buying the finished product. It's just going via the print on demand, so you're not holding any stock yourself.
But what are you actually selling, though, I guess is what it comes down to. And in either way, if it's a product or a digital file, both are still caught.
Nick's added, a lot of print on demand stuff is printed in Eastern Europe, some in the US. Am I responsible, or the supplier who's actually posting it? Same question.
So you're responsible at the point. So if you are the person that puts the product into the EU, you are the person that's responsible. So if you sell it to if you sell to the US and the US then sells into the EU, it'll be the company in the US that would then be responsible. I would imagine they're going to try and pass that back to you, though.
I think they pass it back.
It would be them that would be responsible. So we're working with a number of companies when it's a lot of just when it's like haulage or just the movement and the transfer of the product. Then it's the manufacturer that is responsible ultimately. So that's who we're working with, is all the manufacturers, even though we've sort of been referred by a number of companies that are doing movement of goods. So hopefully that helps.
I'm going to go back to my questions and come back to what's in the chat afterwards. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time quite quickly. So I've had a number of people asking me about EU reps, anything from using a friend or a family member, or I've even had one person ask me if it's possible to ask customers and make them sign an agreement so that they themselves become the responsible person for their own specific items, particularly if they give it a serial number. I'm going to say, one, I don't think it's a very good idea to ask a family member or a friend, even though you probably technically maybe could. I don't think you would want to give them that responsibility. I think it needs to be someone who knows what they're doing. But yeah, can you give your comments?
Yeah, so I suppose working backwards on that last part of it, and can you ask the customer? I think from what we've talked about already, you'd realise that you can't ask the customer because they're not going to have the safety information. Like, you can't really put it back onto them. You can say, oh, here, have the digital file, because also they wouldn't have it, because it's about when the product gets into the EU, and it gets stopped at customs, they're not then going to have the product, are they? Like, that isn't the idea of it, that you'll be appointing that. I think, obviously I haven't seen any case law on it that it's happened yet, but I would imagine that they would say that's not acceptable. You cannot do it. You can appoint a friend and family member. They don't have to be somebody. There's not like a qualification that somebody has to have to be an EU representative. But as Nicola's saying, it's a big requirement. It's there are a lot of things that have to go into the technical file. And when we've been looking at things and working with clients sort of over the past 6 months to get everything ready, lots of people don't have everything ready. They don't have the declaration of conformity. They don't have all of the details. The technical file isn't there. So I think if you are wanting to short the process, there's nothing to say it has to be an official person with an official stamp or official qualifications at this stage. But I think it's risky if you're appointing a friend or family member.
That's my take. So can you give us, and I know this is kind of going to be different for everybody, but what's the basics of what goes into a technical file? Is there kind of a minimum requirement? I mean, you mentioned materials, components, protocols.
Yeah, I'm going to read it on the list. There is a list about the technical documentation that you can get online. So there's lots of lists. I am actually just going to read it so we don't miss anything off. Okay. But you're going to put your name and address. You're going to put the name of your authorized representative and address, and there'll be physical and email addresses, a brief description of the product, and then an identification of the product, for example, the serial number. So you're just going to explain what it is and the serial number, so SKUs, and then the name and address of any facilities involved in the manufacturing of the product. You also want to put your statement of EU conformity, which we talked about, label information, which has to be on there, and the specific information about the labeling, which includes things like safety warnings and information about the product. You want to be including any relevant testing guidelines and information that apply. So certain products will require different testing, certain won't. a list of parts, and a list of test results. Now, remember that the GPSR only covers products that wasn't already covered under other legislation. Now you might think, what does that mean? But it means that obviously a number of products were already highly regulated. They're already things like children's toys or electronics, or certain types of products were already governed by legislation. So obviously, if you were already governed about the technical requirements that you had to provide, and testing, certifications, and things like that, then this won't cover you anyway, because you've already been compliant with that legislation. So this is sort of this booklet, if you like, a brochure about your product and the information relating to that.
So in your technical file, I'm trying to be slightly practical in how I approach it and think about it. Are you basically ending up with a sheet of paper per each product, which if you've got loads of products, then usually in my experience, you have products and then variations. So the product and a variation could kind of just be on one sheet of paper, or even in a spreadsheet of some kind.
Yeah, I mean, how you present it, I mean, I'm obviously going to say, because I act as an authorized representative, make it as easy as possible. But yes, if you have a product which is essentially a version and then there's slightly different variations of it, you're going to be able to just duplicate your technical file for each one and put the relevant test information if it's different, or it might just be approved because it's different colorways or whatever it might be. But you're like, oh, this is a different product, or technically this is a different size because this is a small blanket and this is a large blanket, or whatever it might be. Therefore, they are different products. They'd have their own technical file, but it would be the same essentially, apart from one is one dimension and one is another. So yeah, keeping the information as just as easy. And as I said, you probably already have an inventory of your stock and an inventory of what you do and what's the descriptions of your products. You probably have all of that, but you just maybe don't have it all collated into one document about each product, and then a collection of documents to have this sort of technical file Bible, as it were.
Okay. Can you share that link with me, if possible, to make sure I can pass it on to people, so that anybody who wasn't very quick in writing everything down there can make sure they've got it. Thank you. Okay, so we've got the technical files. What about what labeling needs to go with the actual product?
So labeling requirements are dependent on exactly what you are selling. Now, they suggest that the label should be on the product unless it's not possible to do that, and then you can put it on the packaging, or it's not possible with the packaging. There's again a list of requirements about the labeling, and I think I kind of covered a lot of that off already. It's about having that warning information, the SKU, so that you can identify. So it's things that you will be doing already. You have your own information on, and also your authorized representative. So it's not likely that it's going to be anything different apart from that in your authorized representative. But yeah, it's probably going to be the normal things, the safety legislation. And what people are saying is, well, how can I make my labeling sort of compliant? Well, I have to label it in different languages and things. Potentially, yes. So maybe look at icons for your labeling. So in terms of like warning, can you use a warning symbol rather than words? Potentially you can't, but that's a one way around it. If it's sort of a universal symbol, it's going to translate into every language. It's
starting to think, I suppose, almost like if you buy a piece of flat pack furniture now, you rarely get it in words, do you? It's all diagrams to show you what to do. To starting to think slightly differently. Vic's put, does this mean we need definitive SKUs on all our products? What happens if you don't have SKUs, basically?
You have to have you have to provide something that's identifiable. So they're not being prescriptive about how you manage and how you put things together in many ways. They are saying you can do it in a way that works, but it has to be identifiable. So if you've sent a product in to the EU and the consignment is there, how it needs to translate this. The customs have got that consignment. They then can say, we've got this package, it's got this in it, and they get in touch with your authorized representative, and that authorized representative needs to be able to pick out then, this is the documentation that they need. So there has to be an identification process in terms of product. So
SKUs just make sense because they already exist, but it could be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, it's a worldwide approach. So I'm not saying it's the only one.
Yeah. Okay, so how to choose an EU rep?
Yeah, just do some research, decide, have a look about who's doing what. We kind of fell into providing that service because so many people were coming to us because they know us and trust us in the UK. And so we sort of teamed up with someone based in Dublin and are providing the service. But look for somebody potentially who's been doing this for a while that can help you with the documentation. If you need somebody to go through everything and you want someone that's going to be able to help you ensure that you are compliant as well, maybe look for that service. Some people offer that as well, rather than just being an EU representative. They'll sort of help you with the process and make sure that you are compliant at the same time.
When you say they've been doing it for a while, GPSR only came in December. So what actually are we we're not looking for the GPSR is what I mean as the search term for what they've been doing.
Supporting people with their requirements, of packaging, shipping, and representation. Because there's other, as I said, this is new to capture like the catch-all of all of the products that weren't otherwise caught. There are a number of pieces of legislation that cover off lots of different products already that was already in process. So that's what I mean. There's been a representative for that kind of requirement for a longer period of time.
Okay, can you give us an idea of the cost of hiring an EU rep and how it kind of works? As in, if you've got hundreds of products, are you paying per product? Are you paying per category? How does that kind of work?
It totally depends. Everybody is doing different things. They vary. So for some people, they are, it's based on the number of products that you sell, like the volume that you sell. For some offerings, it's based on the type of different products you sell. So it might be like you can have if you sell t-shirts, for example, that would just be one element. But if you're selling mugs as well, then that would be two different things, and therefore you'd have to have two tiers of their representation. Every single place is doing it very differently. If it's helpful, the way that we're doing it is we believe very competitively, and it's flat fee. So we're not charging depending on how many products you have or how many products you sell or how many different things you're selling, because our aim is to help as many people start reselling back into Europe as possible. We will be changing our pricing structure in due course, but we're just trying to get people back set up. And so therefore we have a flat rate, and it's €300 for the year. You have to bear in mind that this is a process that once you've started doing this, you have to, your EU representative has to keep this information for 10 years. So for some people as well, you're having to sign into longer contracts. Other people are saying, like, as long as you send the information over to somebody else, like we're not like requiring you to sign up for 10 years, for example, but you need to bear that in mind as to how long you're signing up with people for as well.
Yeah, you've jumped to one of my questions there of what happens if, and so my other question is what happens if an EU representative stops being an EU representative? So you're with them long term and they disappear. Not so much what happens as in going forward that you've got to go find a new EU representative, but what happens with the products that have got the old EU representative details with them? What happens in that scenario?
Yeah, that's going to happen. And I guess that's going to be the kind of thing where they'll give you as much notice as possible to update them, or they'll do what many law firms do, in the sense that you'd sell your book of contracts and then say, for example, if people are getting in touch with the old address, that there's the transfer element, so that they're still getting in touch. But obviously it will be for you to ensure that you are keeping your labels up to date with the information. Obviously, people can never know when they might go under, and if they go under, then you're not going to have any recourse anyway. But that's why it might be worthwhile picking a company that is more that has been set up for longer, and might give you that reassurance that they're a bigger outfit and that they won't just go under.
And am I right in thinking, just to add to that one, that if you can prove that you were doing it properly and it's circumstances outside of your control, that actually there's an element of understanding for that potentially?
You have to have an EU representative appointed, so I guess it's a case of if
they'll be able to see that.
With that representative, and that representative is letting you down, like they don't get back in touch, they don't respond to emails, they don't pick up the phone, yeah, obviously there's an element there in terms of like you are doing the best you can, but you do have, that's why it's important to select
It's
somebody
your responsibility still.
trust.
Yeah. And just to say that, follow on from that is what happens if you close your business down before that 10-year rule, someone's put due to illness or retiring, do you have to keep paying for your EU rep for up to that 10-year point, or keep that information available? What happens in that circumstance?
That will depend on the contract that you have with your EU representative, but I would imagine most of them won't. They'll probably just have like the end of your year. I guess it depends where your products are. So if you sold product and there's still product in the EU, or that potentially might move to the EU, it will depend. So say, for example, you're closing down your business, but you're going to sell a lot of stock. If it's all got packaging labels with your business name on, or whatever it might be, that's then going to move into the EU, then obviously there's potential there that it's going to get picked up again. So it's just going to depend on what's happening. But obviously, yeah, from the moment that you've stopped selling into the EU, you don't have to have that EU representative anymore. So I would imagine that most companies, but you have to check the terms of the EU representative, would say that they were just running year to year, or it might be it's a 3-year cycle, whatever it is, that you're just paying to the end of that cycle.
Okay. Trying to look and go, what else have I got on here? I've got some duplicates. Right, just to bring up the one that kind of you alluded to at the start, and that I know I have mentioned to people, that PRAM, Product Regulation and Metrology Bill, have to be careful. I keep on saying meteorology, which is a completely different thing, is currently in progress in the UK. My layman's belief is that at the moment we still are very much echoing EU rules and regulations. So if we get set up and have this deeper understanding and have our technical files in place, whether we sell into EU and Northern Ireland or not right now, actually that's going to probably help us when PRAM comes in. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're doing yourself a massive disservice there. I don't think it's a layman's view. I think it's very astute, and that is what's happening. Like, I think it's moving towards that. Safety legislation is coming. It's not the wrong thing to happen. We're kind of all in agreement. It's got to be a good thing to look after people and protect them. Obviously, there's components of that you might think, well, would you need a representative for your product? It may be just dependent on what you're selling. It may be that the UK government would say, well, that's just too much. Essentially, what they're trying to do for EU is obviously streamline products that are coming in, and the language barrier is a massive thing. So making sure that they've got all of the information about products when it's coming in, that's part of it as well, where you've got the representative, that's what they're acting as. But if it's about providing safety information, I think you're completely right. Getting yourself set up, making sure that you are compliant with these things. And I think it's just accepting that you possibly do a lot of this already, but you've never sat down and documented it. I'm sure all of you really are mindful. You're not being like, yes, how can I create a dangerous product for people? You're creating a safe product, like consideration of things.
I think the problem is it's all up here, isn't it? That's the problem. And it's the fact, as soon as you say something like technical file and you're talking about all of this stuff, it also seems such a massive piece of work to pull it all together, which can put people off. Not just the fact that it named technical makes it sound technical. Whereas I don't think it is necessarily from everything you're describing. It's about, to me, it's knowing who you're buying from. It's having the right supplies. It's having putting the customer first, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's possibly one of those things that you think, actually, I do all of this already. I'm really careful about how I source my products. So it's that kind of thing, like how are you proving that the things that you're putting in the products are safe anyway? You probably spend hours and hours looking for safe suppliers and products that are of high quality. So it's about putting that documentation together, and then remembering that they're things that customers value too. So it's about making maybe some of this part of your brand values, promoting about it, telling people you're doing it, talking about the fact that you want to keep them safe depending on what you're doing and things, if it's relevant to your business. There's an element of seeing it as a task of like, oh, this is the worst thing, it's just going to take me hours, or actually taking people on the journey with you and as why it matters to you and how you source things. Like, people love a behind the scenes journey of how you're sourcing something.
That's true. Okay, so I have some questions about Article 51. which I'll come to. But before that, it's what are the actual penalties if I continue to ship products that only meet UK standards? Oh, have I got... Okay, I didn't actually write one down. I had somebody email me who kind of like, if they object to actually having to do this and go, no, Northern Ireland is part of us, I'm still going to ship. What's going to happen? What trouble can they get into? What enforcement actions will be applied?
So seizure and fines. So they'll seize your products, they won't move, they won't be shipped, and you'll face fines as well. So for non-compliance, so you won't be able to sell your products. Essentially, they won't move, they will just stop and they will be stuck at customs. And then you may also then start getting massive bills for the fact that they're in a warehouse, so paying costs in relation to that, of where they're stored, as well as obviously fines associated with non-compliance.
And am I right in thinking that the level of fines we can't even really specify, because different countries will set different targets?
Yeah, different countries are setting different fines, and that also different countries are, as you would imagine, stopping parcels in different ways. We know that in Ireland they're quite hot on it. They stop a lot of things. They always have done, and they want information about what's in parcels and stuff. They're very hot on it in Ireland, and also in Germany. Lots of things get stopped there. So if you're shipping there, but I think I can't say to you, oh, here's safe to ship. Don't bother if you're selling to here. That it applies equally to every country.
Am I right in thinking, and I'm asking this with kind of not really wanting to ask it, but feeling that I need to, that actually some people are going to send products without complying, without having the EU rep, and they're going to get away with it for a potential little bit. And I'm not suggesting anybody should in any way, shape or form. But what it's going to do is the people who are being legal are going to be annoyed that they've gone to all of this effort and they've done all of this stuff to be legal, and be annoyed that people are getting away with it. But actually, I stand with it's not worth the fine. It's not worth the risk of it. Annoying customers, upsetting customers as goods are seized and stuck in custom. All of that stuff means it's just not worth it. But the actual reality is that probably things will get through, but there's no guarantee.
Yeah, they're not stopping every single parcel, and it's one of those things, as I say, it's when people say, I'm not going to take out travel insurance because I just don't think I'm going to get injured, and then maybe they won't for a number of trips, and then they do. Like, something will stop eventually. Things like it's a numbers game, isn't it? Essentially, the odds of it getting stopped, if you're not selling very much, then you might want to try and push it through. People will also try and sort of maybe say, oh, I'm just gifting this, it's not a sale of a product, it's just friend to friend transaction. People will do all of that kind of stuff, but it depends what kind of business you're running. If you're trying to run a black market business and it not comply, I can only tell, I'll tell you.
That's exactly. But I mean, I think I even read in the regulations, correct me if I'm wrong, and my wording might not be correct, but they're even going to be looking at doing things like, if they see that there's a type of product that particularly is constantly breaching, they're going to almost have mystery shoppers that go out and buy things so they can test them as they come in. I'm sure, I don't think they use the phrase mystery shoppers. I think it was something else, but effectively that process.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see that they wouldn't do that. I think they're busy enough at the moment that they're just catching the parcels as they come in, that they're happening. But yeah, I mean, I think you've got to think about as well, like, what are your aspirations for your business? What are you trying to do? A lot of people are everyone's taking a different view on it. And some people have said, we just won't ship to Europe. Some people are saying, oh, well, it's not really going to impact us. Some of obviously people in Europe, the businesses that are there, it doesn't impact them. So they're not sort of supporting, but people want to buy and then transfer the product around. It depends, like when you're doing consignments or boxes, like we've got people who have like products that they are trying to put together. So for example, like a subscription box where it's a number of products together that they compile, and they're just choosing not to work with those businesses that haven't done this, because they're like, well, I don't actually manufacture a product myself, so how does that impact me? But I need all that tracking information, because I'm the person that ultimately ships the main product, the box, to the EU. And therefore they're then saying, well, if those people aren't complying, even though that they're not having to ship to the EU, they're saying, well, I can't work with them now because I want all of that detail on the packaging, for example. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Right, Article 51. This was kind of like one of the final, I think it was the final line of the regulations. It's about products being available in the EU before the deadline of December 13th, 2024. This is one that has and I'll throw my hands up, that going, my interpretation of this has kind of swung and changed all over the place, as I say, complete layman. I suppose what I'm really interested in is Etsy just today have made the website compliant for GPSR. So they've defined the EU states and even separated off Northern Ireland, which apparently seemed to take forever for them to do. And they've put out a documentation that goes with it. I'm going to share it on the screen so I can read it.
Yeah, this is hot off the press. This is today. So
this is brand new today that's come out. I've highlighted the section. I've probably highlighted way too much. It's really just that top paragraph. But GPSR does not apply to products listed before 13th of December 2024. Our current interpretation, and I love the fact they've said interpretation because it does vary so much, as we've seen, is that it only applies to products placed on the market on or after the 13th of December 2024 and does not include pre-13th of December listings, even if they are renewed. This means that no action is required for listings already available in EEA states and or Northern Ireland before this date, as they are exempt from GPSR requirements, provided they met prior safety requirements. Can you give us some comment on that, please?
I don't agree. I differ in this interpretation, and I've held the same interpretation that I've had on this throughout. I've seen people do U-turns on this as well. It doesn't make any sense for this to be correct. This idea of listings. This is about the GPSR, when we look at it, is about the sale of goods into the EU. If your products were already in the EU, so in a warehouse, not on the water, so not being shipped, but in a warehouse in the EU, essentially, before the 13th of December, then it didn't apply to you. So those labeling requirements, if you've got stock in a warehouse, it would have been fine if you can prove, the consignment moved before the 13th of December. To suggest now that there was a listing on a website and then you're going to move the product, all that I can see happening is the product is going to be shipped into the EU now, because we're past that date, and they're going to say, where is that information? Where's the safety information? Where's your technical file? Who is your authorized representative? And I just don't agree that that's correct. But that's my interpretation.
I can understand their interpretation. If I'm honest, I probably was along that lines when I very first read it. But then you come down to the fact of, how do you prove it? How does the process and practical bit actually work? How does it get to customs? Do you just literally write on the package, this was listed on Etsy before the 13th of December?
It doesn't make any difference, but the problem is,
does it?
They're trying to, but GPSR, the customs people don't care about what Etsy say. Exactly. Because they care about the safety of products entering into their country after the 13th of December 2024. Therefore, to say that there's a list, to say that as long as it was listed for sale, I just don't agree.
It doesn't matter whether you can prove it or not, to be honest. But ultimately, that's my bit that goes, it's ludicrous, because you're not just going to be able to write something and they go, oh, that's it.
Think about what is GPSR trying to do? What is the whole process behind it? It's that when you go back to what is it? And I've seen it anyway, because a couple of clients have actually asked me that question. I've given them that answer. They didn't like the answer. They've gone off and asked the question, and they've come back and they've gotten the answer. Because I know that there's somebody else who did quite a well-known person who supports product-based businesses in the UK, and they gave a specific answer in that training before Christmas. And I said it all the time, didn't agree with that. They went off and asked authorities, and they've come back and they have agreed with me. So obviously, you have to bear in mind, Etsy will have a legal team. They'll have paid a significant amount of money to get that legal information, to put that. They've taken a long time, a month, more than 2 months, haven't they, to put this together. It won't have been insignificant. Obviously, you may want to defer to them, and that's your decision. But equally, if you're doing it anyway, because you're going to be shipping to the EU, like with new products, it's a task you're going to have to be doing anyway.
Well, reality is, it doesn't matter what Etsy says. If the product, when it gets to customs, is turned away, it's going
to be your problem, and
it's you as the seller that's the problem. It's not Etsy's, though. Marketplaces do have much more responsibility under GPSR than they've ever had before. But I just think, Etsy are kind of pushing it there. Right. Is there anything else that you feel that we haven't covered, Lucy? And I'm going to quickly scan through the questions because I am very aware of time. And then also, can you tell us a little bit more about your EU representative service and how we can find out more about it?
Yeah, I can tell you a bit more about that. I feel like we've covered a lot. I think if anybody is feeling really overwhelmed, really disheartened, feels like this is hard, you are not alone. It very much does feel like that. It is hard, it is annoying, it is an extra massive piece of administrative burden for you. It is, unfortunately, this is already in place, so it's not a case of not doing it, but you can pause. You can say to people, you're not shipping right now to certain countries. We've been supporting people, as I say, set up a whole new business based out of Dublin last year to support people with their requirements. When you purchase from us, we provide you with templates, so you've got that documentation to help, or sort of ideas for documentation to help you set up your technical file. We don't sit within your business and go through every single element of it to work out if you're compliant and which testing requirements you need and certificates you need or anything like that. But we provide you with information, collate everything, and then it's a flat fee for the year, and then you can go on and you use our information and our address. The business over there is called RepGuardia. It's RepGuardia Global. So yeah, would love for you, if anybody needs any further support or needs an EU representative, please do get in touch. I'll even, if it's okay, so I'll just drop the link of the website.
Please do. Yeah.
Then you can have a look.
Saves any typos. Right, so I am going to pick up on, there's one question here I want to pick up on. What happens if you sell trade to a UK company and they then sell to the EU? And second question, what if you provided these products prior to the GPSR? I presume you mean if there's a problem with a product on that one. And lastly, what if my EU customers use someone like the post lady to forward on products? So I'm sending to a UK address. How am I supposed to know if my products are then being forwarded on?
Yeah, great question. So it is about like supply chain and things. So as long as you've got information available. So yeah, the first part of that is if your transaction is to somebody in the UK, is like the example I've given before about my person with the subscription boxes, they are purchasing in the UK and it is getting sold out into the EU. They're actually not selling it. It just as a perk of a membership, which is even more frustrating for them because they're not selling. But essentially, yeah, your duty is still, which is why it's important that you provide a product that is safe and that you have information about your product should you be asked for it. But yeah, if you can say, look, I shipped to Nicola and she's based in the UK, and then Nicola has put this product as part of something else, and you can prove from the shipping label, then obviously it may be that it comes back to you and there's a question that gets asked, but you just have your documentation in place to prove that you're not shipping to the EU. I guess that's the same with anything. If you had a car and it was used in a crime, you'd say it wasn't me, I wasn't driving it at the time. It's that kind of thing. Is it I wasn't using it then? So making sure that you're really clear. And also, I suppose one of the things we haven't touched on is about recall protocols, having that in place. So making sure you know how you would contact consumers and things as well. So it might be if you were alerted at all to anybody reselling, making sure that you're really clear. Might be a requirement that you need to update terms and conditions to say that they're not permitted. You can even put that. I put in my terms and conditions, you're not permitted to resell this product, but not for resale, or specifically not for sale into the EU. To try and mitigate that coming up, that you would then be caught out.
That's I like that one. I like that as a tip to make sure it's in your terms and conditions. I mean, recall protocol in some ways, not that I don't think I know of any of my business owners that I've ever worked with that have needed to do recalls, but putting that to one side, hypothetically, it's far easier for us as very small businesses to recall and contact consumers directly. We have all of that information. Am I right in thinking that from a GPSR point of view, that is the onus of it? They want to make sure that people are contacted directly, not that there's just a notice put in a newspaper somewhere that people may or may not see.
So with all of this, it's about adequacy of what you're doing. And yeah, you're right. I think as a small business, you're probably really well set up. You probably have your list segmented. You'd know when people have done things, but it's about knowing, I guess, for you from a product point of view. It's different if you're selling or like just sending marketing emails, but at what point do you know the date that any materials or components and product of your products changed over. So if there's a problem with a certain type of consignment, and this is why the SKUs are important to say it impacts these SKUs, it doesn't impact these ones, to anyone that was sold this. But you'll have all of that information, I'm sure. So it's a case of, and it doesn't have to be this. The recall protocol is something that people have found very difficult, because they said, I've never had to have a recall protocol before, but that doesn't mean you don't have one. It's about having this recall protocol in place now to say, yeah, I will just contact people. I will just look at the relevant, if there's a problem with the product, I will just look at the relevant consignment court, and I will contact people by email. But then there's a step before that, isn't it, by saying to people, please ensure that you provide us with your email and you keep your email address up to date so that we can let you know if there are any problems. So it might be about having slightly different segmentation, or people being able to opt out of marketing because they only want to get correspondence from you if it's an important product safety information email. They don't want to opt out from hearing everything from you. And so it's those kind of parts that you would put into your sort of recall protocol, that you've considered the safety elements of it, and you are able to communicate. But yeah, you see it when you go into the supermarket, don't you? Sometimes there's a notice on the till that says this product has been recalled, and therefore they're putting it at the point of purchase. So if you might have to put a pop-up on your website, or you would email people, if that's how you purchase from, you might put something on your Instagram. Whereas if you are selling in a store, people would have it at the shop front when you go in. Did you buy this can of beans at this time?
I'm trying to, I think we're kind of there. Is there anything anybody else wants to ask? I realise that because we've gone over it by asking questions, it's been a little bit disjointed in coming at it. But I think, for me to sum it up, correct me where I'm wrong, Lucy, please, that basically technical file, and this isn't over worrying about what you need to put in it, because some products will naturally need more than others depending on what it is. Some products are going to be really, really not a lot of information because the nature of them. Am I right in that it's,
yeah, I mean, I think
don't overcomplicate.
Not optimistic to say it's a page. And it will depend how much testing information, though, and like test reports you've done on things. For some products don't have any. They might do, they might not. But yeah, you're not looking at really lengthy documentation necessarily, but it depends what's in it. It depends how many components are in it.
So we've got the technical documentation. We are making sure that we know how we're going to do any recalls should that occasion need to happen. So you've got your recall protocol. And I'd kind of suggest that, knowing that PRAM is coming, whether you're selling into the EU or not, starting to compile that, if you haven't already got it, is worth doing anyway. But for selling into EU and Northern Ireland, we are looking at having that EU representative, of which obviously we've got your link there. Oh, I know. See, I knew there was a question that had come into my head. I have seen some people talk about some very cheap EU representatives. I'm not here because I'm trying to sell your service, because that's not what I'm here for. I haven't looked into your service particularly. But what should people be careful of and looking for if something seems, because I'm very aware that if it's very, very cheap, like, I don't know, £40 for a year, sure, that to me raises some red flags that there's things that you might not be getting that you need to get. So what do you actually need to make sure you're getting?
Yeah, it's ensuring that you've got the coverage that you need and that they are who they say they are. As I say, like, it's hard to necessarily know that. I think that part of what ours comes from the fact that we've been very clear in saying that we support people in the UK and have done for years, and there's a UK business sort of behind it. But we're based in Dublin with the Rep Guardian business. But I mean, ours is very, very low too, and I think that you do worry
a lot lower. Honestly, I've heard of a lot lower. So I think
you worry if things are too low and you worry if things are too high. I don't agree that there should be pricing where you price per different country. But then it depends on what the product is and if there are specific requirements for selling into that country, for example, for that exact product. As I said, we are amending our pricing tariff from April. We're just giving people a real head start to get involved, to get set up, get invested in it so that they're set up. But I think it's not unreasonable when you think about the amount of work that has to go in. Like, if you have a huge product portfolio, it's one thing saying, oh, we've got like 10 versions of the same thing. Like we sell t-shirts, we need to give you a different technical file because it is a different printer, it's a different design, and we need to give you you need to be able to provide the correct thing to customs, the correct information, the correct file. But if you're doing t-shirts and shoes and leather bags and frames and cups and all of the different things, they're all going to have a different risk assessment as part of the technical file. They're all going to have different product information, and all of that information has to be reviewed and looked at by your authorized representative. They've got to hold all of that information for you and on your behalf. So you can see therefore that there is a substantive amount of work that's going to go into looking at that documentation on your behalf.
Vic, just have one question. Sorry, Vic, I think you asked this earlier and I missed it. Does the documentation differ for digital products?
No, the guidance at the moment is the same for the different things. I think you might then say, well, how am I going to label something? But it's about having that information on your product in the same way. So safety warnings, it's a brief description about your product. So it's the same safety information, but obviously you're going to label it slightly different if it's within a digital product versus on an actual physical product.
Does that help, Vic? It's just a bit of a minefield, isn't it? It's one of those that it is and it isn't at the same time. And I don't know if that makes any sense. But on the one hand, it's because most of it's up here and most of it just happens on autopilot. Yeah. But I'm like Lucy, that I believe most of you genuinely are selling safe products. You are putting the effort in to make sure that they're safe. You wouldn't send anything out the door that you weren't 100% happy with. It's now just about having the documentation to prove that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that we've been supporting people. Obviously, it's been a real flurry of new people that we've been working with since, like, even just the start of the year. It wasn't even the end of last year. People are just really being like, wow, I've got to do this. Yeah. And I think that it's very daunting at the start, thinking, oh my goodness, what am I doing? But when they've got our templates and they're like working through and just putting in, this is a brief overview of the product, and this is what the product does, and these are components, and as they start to write it out, it does feel less overwhelming. But obviously that's going to depend on how big your product portfolio is. If you've got hundreds or thousands of products, then it is a huge task, but it may be something that you could just sort of do steadily. One of our clients who is managing this really well is just put a notice on the website saying, I am shipping to the EU, but it's taking longer than normal. And what she's literally doing is every time she gets a sale to the EU, she's creating the technical file for that product.
That makes sense.
And she's just doing it slowly. And she said, I'll confirm when I'm going to be able to do it. And we actually said to us, are you happy? This is in the Dublin-based company. She's saying, are you happy for me to do this? And I said, we cannot have any products on the market that do not have the where we don't hold the files. And she's like, that's fine. I'm just, every time I get one, I'm going to do that, send it over to you, and this is how we're going to do it. And that's the way she's managing it.
So in that scenario, I'm just trying to intrigued on timescale here. Sorry. So when she gets the documentation to you, how long does it take then for you to go, yeah, that's okay, you can send that?
So we're working on a timescale between 48 and 72 hours.
Okay, that's not too bad, is it? So literally. But I like that way of thinking. That makes it seem a little bit more manageable, doesn't it? That you're not trying to do your whole product range all in one go. That if you go right.
Yeah, and I think what she's saying on the front end is, I'll confirm to you within if you're placing an order from the EU, I think she's saying, I'll confirm to you within 5 to 7 business days as to when I'll be able to ship this. Yeah. So she's built in time at the front end. She's saying, you can place your order now, and I reserve the right to reject it. And a couple of them she has, because she just said, I'm just busy and I've not had time to do it. And that's up to you, isn't it? I'm not saying that's the way to run it, but I think we're all small. Like, remember, I'm a small business owner too. We're all small business owners just trying to do the best we can with the resources that we have. And she doesn't want to cut off that gateway of.
She doesn't want to close the door completely, but she's also very aware that it's not feasible for her to just sit down and do all of this.
Because because it's annoying, isn't it? The hours and hours it's going to spend and almost cutting off that income stream, essentially. So she said, I've left it open and I've said to people, you can purchase now. And also then she knows she's got the order, so she's a bit like more incentivized to do it. And remember, she's done once you've done one, she's done more of them, so it's quicker to do.
And you can duplicate that for any of the ones that
it's not totally different products either.
Yeah.
They're not, it's some of it's all in the same industry of products. So although there are variations, it's not completely different. So she kind of can utilize what she's already done and it doesn't take as long.
I like that. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that gives a way of making it work, even though it's far from ideal. No one's saying it's an ideal kind of perfect system, but at least it makes it seem like it's achievable rather than a mammoth front end task.
Yeah, and you don't have to say to your customers, I'm not shipping to you anymore, which maybe you don't want to do, and you lose custom then, don't you?
Yeah, no, I like that. Thank you, Lucy. As ever, absolutely brilliant and wonderful. Thank you for answering all the questions. I'm sure there'll be more that come up, but I think we've got a baseline of knowledge now, and hopefully it seems a little less scary. I'm not going to say it's not a lot of work, but it hopefully seems a little bit less scary and much more understanding about why it's needed, and actually that even when you see Etsy putting out some information, you don't necessarily trust it, because as they've put it, that's their interpretation, and that means that they can change their mind at any time too. They give themselves a get out clause. So thank you, Lucy.
Thank you so much for having me. And I know that this type of training, in terms of being conversational, is slightly different. I've been doing sort of multiple trainings on this sort of like daily since the start of the year. And I think sometimes when it's just me sitting with a slide deck and teaching you, it's so dry, and it just, you're having so many questions because it is so new that it doesn't really help. Whereas actually having this Q&A and this conversation is brilliant. So thank you for facilitating that, Nicola. It's a great way to discuss it. And thank you for inviting me to chat to you today.
No, thank you for making the time. Much appreciated. I will get the replay out to everyone. I'd like to say I want to try and summarize it, but I don't know if I actually will get round to it quite quickly. I will at some point in the future, and I'll make sure I send that out as well. And obviously I will get you, I'll send you Lucy's website URL. My words had a complete moment at that point, but yeah, I will get all of the information out that you need as well. So thank you very, very much. I'm going to stop the recording.